I never imagined the silence of my own children would be the loudest confession of my biggest failure. The opulent penthouse apartment, a monument to my ambition high above Central Park, often felt like a gilded cage, its walls echoing with the unvoiced pleas of Leo and Luna, my 7-year-old twins. They were beautiful, bright-eyed children, with a shared cascade of strawberry blonde hair and an uncanny resemblance to their late mother, Sarah. But they had never uttered a single word. Not a mommy, not a daddy, not even a garbled coo in infancy. My world, filled with the roar of private jets, the clatter of Wall Street, and the hushed reverence of boardrooms, was constantly brought to a standstill by their profound, unsettling quiet. For years I had thrown money at the problem like it was another hostile takeover. The best pediatric neurologists from Boston to Stanford, speech therapists whose hourly rates would make a neurosurgeon blush, experimental treatments in Switzerland, I'd tried them all. Each specialist had a new theory, a different obscure syndrome, a fresh set of expensive diagnostic tests, but the outcome was always the same: a shrug, a sympathetic glance, and an invoice that felt like a slap in the face. My calendar was meticulously organized, every minute accounted for, yet the vast empty spaces where my children's voices should have been remained stubbornly unfilled. I was Arthur Sterling, a titan of industry, a man who built empires from nothing, who could command the attention of world leaders with a single phone call. Yet I was utterly powerless in the face of my own children's silence. The irony was a bitter, metallic taste in my mouth, a constant reminder of a failure I couldn't outsource, couldn't acquire, couldn't simply bulldoze through. My late wife, Sarah, bless her optimistic heart, had always believed they would speak. She would spend hours with them, reading stories, singing lullabies in her soft, melodic voice, her face a mask of serene patience even as I watched, my chest tight with the frustration I dared not voice. After she passed, 5 years ago, in a sudden, senseless accident, the weight of their muteness became a lead blanket, smothering any flicker of hope. I doubled down on my work, convincing myself that providing the most luxurious life, the most cutting-edge medical care, was the truest form of fatherhood. I outsourced the day-to-day parenting to an army of nannies, tutors, and therapists, all impeccably vetted, all highly qualified, all equally ineffective in coaxing a sound from my precious twins. My mornings started with a workout in my personal gym, followed by a quick breakfast with the kids, a silent ritual where I'd scan the morning headlines while they ate their organic cereal, their eyes often fixed on some distant, unseen point. My evenings were a blur of late meetings, dinner with clients or charity galas, leaving just enough time to kiss their sleeping foreheads before collapsing into my own king-sized bed, haunted by the quiet. It was during one such quiet morning that Maria entered our lives. My previous housekeeper, an older woman named Mrs. Henderson, had finally retired, moving down to Florida to live out her golden years. Maria Rodriguez was her replacement, a woman in her late 40s with kind, tired eyes and hands that moved with a quiet efficiency. She wasn't like the others I had employed over the years. There was no pretense, no fawning. She simply did her job, meticulously, thoroughly, almost invisibly. But I noticed the way her gaze lingered on Leo and Luna, not with pity like so many others, but with an almost contemplative curiosity. She watched them play, watched them eat, watched them draw, her expression unreadable. I dismissed it as natural curiosity, another fleeting interest in the mute millionaire's kids, a morbid fascination I had grown accustomed to. Yet something about her presence began to subtly shift the atmosphere in the sterile, silent penthouse. It was an almost imperceptible change, like a faint scent carried on the breeze. A warmth I hadn't realized was missing until it began to appear. One afternoon, I found Maria sitting on the floor of the playroom, not cleaning, but simply observing Leo as he meticulously arranged a collection of toy cars. Luna was engrossed in a drawing at a low table. Maria wasn't interacting with them, just watching, a small, knowing smile playing on her lips. I cleared my throat, feeling a flash of irritation. My staff were paid to work, not to socialize. She looked up, startled, and quickly rose to her feet. "Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice soft, with a faint, lilting accent I couldn't place. I was just admiring their focus. I merely nodded, a dismissive gesture, and she returned to dusting the impossibly expensive bookshelves. But as I watched her walk away, I caught a glimpse of Leo, his head still bent over his cards, but his eyes, for a split second, flickered in Maria's direction, a hint of something unarticulated passing between them, a silent acknowledgement. It was a micro-trigger, a fleeting moment that barely registered in my busy mind, yet it lodged itself somewhere in the periphery, a tiny anomaly in the meticulously ordered universe of my despair. It was the first fissure in what I had considered an unshakable, immutable truth about my children's world, and by extension, my own. I had convinced myself that my children's condition was a purely medical one, a neurological glitch that a bigger check or a more prestigious institution could eventually fix. Dr. Hayes, a renowned pediatric neurologist I'd flown in from Johns Hopkins at an exorbitant fee, had just finished his preliminary assessment. He was an impeccably dressed man, with a calming demeanor and an impressive CV, and he spoke of atypical neurodevelopmental pathways and innovative gene therapies, with a confidence that, for a moment, made my chest lighten. He'd proposed a groundbreaking experimental therapy involving stem cells, available only in a specialized clinic in Geneva, and the cost was astronomical, even for me. Yet, as he spoke, I felt a familiar surge of hope, a desperate clutching at a new solution. This was it, I told myself. This was the answer. I'd wire the funds immediately. I'd charter the private jet. I'd dedicate every waking moment to facilitating this treatment. I believed, truly believed, that by pouring more resources, more money, more of my singular focus on problem solving, I was being the best father I could be. This was my way of loving them, of saving them. This was my false exit, the belief that I was finally on the right track, that the silence was about to be broken by a medical miracle. Maria, however, continued her quiet observations. I saw her interact with the twins in ways the nannies never did. She wouldn't just bring them their snacks. She'd place them on the table with a specific, almost ritualistic arrangement, and the twins would respond with subtle shifts in their body language, a slight tilt of the head, a delicate adjustment of their hands. One afternoon I walked into the kitchen to find Maria kneading dough, humming a soft, wordless tune. Leo and Luna sat at the kitchen island, not playing with toys, but watching her hands, their faces rapt. As she worked, she'd occasionally make a small, rhythmic tapping sound on the counter with her knuckles. And then I saw it. Leo, usually so withdrawn, echoed the tapping, a faint, almost inaudible rhythm. Maria glanced at him, her eyes twinkling, and tapped again, a slightly different pattern. Leo responded. It wasn't speech, not in the way I understood it, but it was communication, a small, intimate dance of sound and rhythm. I stood there, frozen for a long moment, my coffee growing cold in my hand, as a bizarre, unsettling thought flickered through my mind. They were communicating, right under my nose, and I had been too blind, too caught up in my own expectations, to see it. It was another micro-trigger, a tiny crack in my carefully constructed reality. Later that week, I found a small, leather-bound journal tucked away in an old box in Sarah's closet, a place I hadn't touched since her passing. It wasn't a diary, but a collection of observations, thoughts, and worries she had about the twins in their earliest years. I'd always been so focused on my work, on expanding Sterling Holdings, that much of their infancy felt like a blur. I opened the journal, the smell of aged paper and her faint perfume rising to meet me. Her elegant handwriting filled the pages. Arthur is so proud of his empire, his successes, one entry read, dated shortly after the twins' first birthday. But sometimes I worry he forgets that our true empire is here, in this home, with our children. The boys are so quiet. Dr. Evans says it's early, not to worry, but sometimes I feel like they're waiting for him to truly see them, to truly hear them. He talks about fixing them, but what if they don't need fixing? What if they just need to be understood? He works so hard for us, I know, but I worry about the silence he's creating, not just for them, but for himself. The words hit me like a physical blow. Sarah, my sweet, understanding Sarah, had seen it all along. She had seen the chasm I was creating, the emotional void that my material provision couldn't fill. She wasn't just observing the children, she was observing me, and her observations were far more insightful than any specialist's diagnosis. I had dismissed her gentle concerns then, waved them off as new mother anxieties, too preoccupied with the quarterly reports and stock market fluctuations. Now, reading her words, a cold dread began to seep into my bones. What if I wasn't their savior but part of the problem? What if the silence he's creating was literal? I closed the journal, the weight of her unspoken accusations pressing down on me. The experimental therapy in Geneva suddenly seemed less like a beacon of hope and more like an expensive distraction, a way for me to avoid confronting the real issue. This was the second narrative block, a raw, painful glimpse into a past I had willfully ignored, a crucial piece of the puzzle that my own ambition had kept hidden. It shifted my perspective, not just on the twins, but on myself, on my entire approach to fatherhood. The silent hum of my pristine apartment suddenly felt less like peace and more like an indictment. The growing tension in the penthouse was almost palpable, at least for me. My interactions with Maria became more charged, not with anger, but with an unspoken question that hung in the air between us. I found myself watching her more closely, trying to decipher the subtle cues she exchanged with Leo and Luna. I noticed how she didn't just speak to them, but used gestures, intonations, even certain facial expressions that seemed to elicit a response, a flicker in their eyes, a small, knowing nod. They responded to her in ways they never did to the nannies, or even to me. I'd try to replicate her techniques, making gentle tapping sounds, humming soft melodies, but the twins would just stare at me blankly, their faces unreadable, their silence unwavering. My attempts felt clumsy, forced, and utterly ineffective. The frustration was immense, but it was coupled with a dawning, terrifying realization. Maria knew something I didn't. She had tapped into a channel I couldn't access, a language I couldn't speak. One evening, I overheard Maria in the twins' playroom. I paused outside the door, straining to listen. She was singing a lullaby, a foreign tune, with a melody that was both melancholic and comforting. And then I heard it, a soft, breathy sound, like a sigh, followed by another. It wasn't speech, not really, but it was distinct, responsive. I pushed the door open, my heart hammering against my ribs. Maria looked up, her hands still gently stroking Luna's hair. Leo was curled up beside his sister, his eyes half closed. "Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice even. "I was just getting them ready for bed." I waved my hand dismissively. "What was that sound?" I demanded, my voice rougher than I intended. "From Luna." Maria hesitated, her gaze thoughtful. "They make sounds, Mr. Sterling. Small ones. When they feel safe. When they feel heard." "Heard?" I scoffed, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. "I've spent millions trying to hear them. They're mute, Maria, medically, irrevocably mute." Maria stood up, her eyes unwavering. "Perhaps not in the way you understand mute, Mr. Sterling," she said softly. "The human spirit can find many ways to speak, even without words." Her words hung in the air, challenging my entire worldview. My initial impulse was to fire her, to silence this inconvenient truth. But something in her steady gaze Something in the way the twins, even in their half-sleep, seemed to emanate a quiet calm in her presence, stopped me. I retreated, my mind a storm of confusion and mounting dread. This was the second turn, a moral twist that slowly started to unravel my conviction. The problem wasn't just medical, it was profoundly emotional, and I was implicated. The idea that their silence wasn't a deficit but a response began to fester in my mind, a poison that slowly worked its way through my meticulously ordered thoughts. The following day, after a particularly draining board meeting, I found myself inexplicably drawn to the twins' playroom again. Maria was there, sorting through their art supplies. On the floor lay a collection of drawings. Most were typical childish scribbles, but one caught my eye. It was a brightly colored depiction of two children, unmistakably Leo and Luna, holding hands, their faces smiling. Above their heads, instead of words, were tiny swirling lines, like sound waves, but muted, indistinct. And in the corner of the drawing, a small, almost invisible figure, a woman with long, dark hair, standing slightly apart, her hand raised as if gently ushering them towards the light. Maria. It wasn't just a drawing, it was an interpretation, a silent commentary on their world. "They drew this yesterday," Maria said, noticing my gaze. "They often express themselves through their art." She picked up another drawing, this one depicting a large, imposing figure with a briefcase, his back turned to two smaller figures. There were no sound waves above the larger figure, only emptiness. My breath caught in my throat. It was me. The figure was me. My own children, through their silent art, were illustrating my profound absence, my emotional distance. The second narrative block, this hidden piece of art, was a punch to the gut. It wasn't a medical diagnosis, it was a deeply personal, heartbreaking revelation. "Maria," I finally managed, my voice hoarse. What are you saying?" Maria turned to me, her eyes filled with a profound sorrow mixed with a fierce resolve. "Mr. Sterling, the twins are not mute because of a defect in their bodies. They are mute because of a defect in their world. When their mother passed, it was a profound shock. But before that, there was already a silence, wasn't there? You were always working, always busy. They felt your absence. And then there was an incident. You were on a business call late at night. You were frustrated, shouting into the phone. The children, they were just outside the office playing. They heard you, heard the anger, heard the frustration. They retreated. And then their mother, after she was gone, the silence became a shield, a protection. My mind raced back, trying to pinpoint the incident. There had been so many late-night calls, so many heated negotiations. But one particular evening flashed into my memory. A failed merger, millions on the line, my temper flaring, shouting obscenities into the receiver. I had been so consumed, so utterly oblivious. Could it be? Could my own words, my own uncontrolled anger have caused this? But they're mute, Maria. They can't speak. Maria shook her head slowly. They can make sounds, Mr. Sterling. They can communicate. But they have chosen not to. Not in the way you expect. Not in a world that felt too loud, too unpredictable, too unsafe. They developed their own language, their own way of being. They make small sounds for me, small gestures, because I take the time to listen, truly listen, without judgment, without demands. They make a small clicking sound for playtime, a soft hum for Maria. They are not broken, Mr. Sterling. They are survivors. But you have been deaf to their true voices because you were only listening for the sounds you wanted to hear. The air left my lungs. The ground beneath me felt like it had dissolved. It wasn't some rare neurological condition. It wasn't a random, cruel twist of fate. It was me. My ambition, my neglect, my rage, my very presence had inadvertently silenced my children. This was the third turn, the true secret exploding into the open, inverting every role. I wasn't the benevolent provider. I was the unwitting cause of their suffering. I wasn't just a failure. I was a perpetrator. And the irony, The brutal, crushing irony was that I, Arthur Sterling, who prided himself on understanding market forces and human psychology, had been utterly blind to the most profound dynamics within my own home, within my own family. The silence of my children was not a mystery to be solved with money. It was a wound to be healed with presence, with understanding, with a profound, terrifying shift in my own perception of reality. The words selective mutism whispered in my mind, not as a medical term, but as a chilling indictment of my paternal dereliction. The weight of Maria's revelation was crushing. I spent the next few days in a fog, the luxurious confines of my penthouse now feeling like a prison of my own making. Every silent glance from Leo or Luna was a fresh stab of guilt. Every quiet moment was an accusation. My empire, my carefully constructed world of power and influence, suddenly seemed hollow, meaningless. What was the point of all that wealth if I had lost the most precious voices in my life? My internal conflict raged. I could dismiss Maria, of course, accuse her of overstepping, of being sentimental. I could cling to Dr. Hayes's sophisticated diagnoses, pour more money into experimental treatments, convince myself that this was the path of a responsible father. That would be the easy way out, the logical one, the one that preserved my pride and my carefully curated image. But the image was shattered. Sarah's journal, the twins' drawings, Maria's unwavering honesty, they had all converged to expose a raw, agonizing truth I could no longer ignore. The choice was not between money and a cure, but between pride and love, between a father who provided and a father who truly saw. Could I, Arthur Sterling, the man who never admitted fault, who always had the answer, concede that my own actions had caused this profound silence? Could I dismantle the very foundation of my self-worth, the belief that I was a good father because I was a successful provider? This was the fourth turn, the moment of emotional and moral reckoning. I realized my own colossal flaw, my inability to truly connect, to be present, to listen beyond the clamor of my own ambition. My success had made me deaf, not only to my children's pleas, but to their very essence. The thought of confessing my failures, not just to Maria, but to my children, to myself, was terrifying. It meant confronting the ugliest parts of myself, the parts I had carefully buried under layers of wealth and achievement. It meant tearing down the protective walls I had built around my heart after Sarah's death, the walls that had, in their own way, contributed to the twins' retreat into silence. One evening, after the nannies had left and the apartment was cloaked in its usual quiet, I found Maria in the kitchen, preparing a light meal for herself. I walked over to her, my hands clammy, my heart pounding. "Maria," I said, my voice barely a whisper, I want to apologize for not listening, for not seeing, for everything." She stopped chopping vegetables, her knife resting on the cutting board, and turned to face me. Her eyes were still kind, but there was a depth to them now, a weariness that spoke of years of witnessing unspoken pain. "It's not about an apology, Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice gentle. "It's about change, about listening with your heart, not just your ears." I nodded, feeling a lump form in my throat. "What do I do?" I asked, the words raw with desperation. How do I begin?" She looked at me for a long moment, then her gaze softened. "Begin by being present, truly present. Not the man who provides, but the father who plays, who listens to their silence, who loves them not for what they say, but for who they are." It was a humbling moment, a titan of industry reduced to a pleading child, seeking guidance from his housekeeper. And if it were you, would you have the courage to do the same? To shed the layers of pride and privilege, to admit such a profound personal failure? I felt a wave of shame wash over me, but beneath it, a tiny flicker of something else. Hope. A difficult, painful, but genuine hope for connection. My emotional choice was made. I would stop chasing a cure and start pursuing a relationship. I would learn their language, however silent it might be. This was the most terrifying, yet most liberating decision I had ever made. The following morning, I called Dr. Hayes and cancelled the Geneva therapy. His professional disappointment was evident, but I held my ground. Instead, I called my office and cleared my schedule for the foreseeable future. My board members would be furious, my investments might falter, but for the first time in years, I felt a sense of clarity, a purpose that transcended profit margins and market shares. I spent the day simply being with Leo and Luna. I sat on the floor of the playroom, not correcting them, not trying to engage them in conversation, but simply observing. I watched Luna meticulously arrange her colored blocks into complex patterns, her brow furrowed in concentration. I watched Leo trace intricate designs on a foggy window pane, his movements deliberate and graceful. I didn't try to force interaction. I just existed in their space, open to whatever they might offer. Hours passed. The nannies looked on, confused, as I declined to leave for my usual afternoon appointments. Maria moved quietly through the apartment, a faint approving smile on her face. As evening approached, I found myself sitting on the sofa, a book open on my lap, but my eyes fixed on the twins, who were drawing at a low table. I closed the book, setting it aside. I remembered Maria's earlier advice about listening with the heart. I took a deep breath, and then, slowly, deliberately, I made the tapping sound on the armrest of the sofa, the same rhythmic pattern Maria had used in the kitchen. I waited. Nothing. My heart sank, a familiar wave of despair threatening to engulf me. But then, as I was about to give up, Leo looked up. His eyes, usually so guarded, met mine. And then he tapped. A faint, almost imperceptible tap on the table with his small finger, echoing my rhythm. My breath hitched. I tapped again, a slightly different beat. Luna, who had been engrossed in her drawing, now looked up, her head tilted. And then she joined in. A soft, ethereal hum, a sound I had only heard her make with Maria. Tears welled in my eyes, blurring my vision. It wasn't speech. It wasn't the verbal outburst I had so desperately craved for 7 long years. But it was a connection, a bridge across the chasm of silence I had inadvertently created. It was their voice, in its purest, most vulnerable form, offered to me. I choked back a sob, not of sorrow, but of overwhelming gratitude and sorrow for all the lost years. I continued to tap, to hum, to meet their gazes, to simply be with them, truly present, truly listening. The dam broke within me. All the suppressed grief for Sarah, all the guilt, all the loneliness, poured out in silent tears that streamed down my face. I wasn't just connecting with my children. I was finally connecting with myself, with the broken, desperate man I had become beneath the veneer of success. Have you ever lost someone to your own pride? I realized that I had lost myself, and in doing so, had almost lost my children. The penthouse, once a monument to my success and a tomb of silence, began to transform. It wasn't an overnight miracle. Leo and Luna didn't suddenly burst into speech, but the quality of their silence changed. It was no longer a wall, but a canvas upon which we slowly, painstakingly, began to paint a new language of gestures, rhythms, shared glances, and small, precious sounds that were just for us. I continued to cancel meetings, to delegate responsibilities, to prune back the demanding branches of my empire. My board was indeed furious. My stock took a hit, but for the first time, those losses felt insignificant. I spent my days in the playroom, in the kitchen, in the park, learning to read the subtle nuances of my children's communication. Maria became not just a housekeeper, but a gentle guide, an unspoken teacher. Her presence a quiet affirmation of a different kind of strength, a different kind of wisdom. She would often leave small notes for me, simple observations like, "Luna likes the blue crayons today," or Leo responded to the birdsong on the terrace. Each note was a tiny lesson, a thread guiding me closer to my children. One afternoon, Maria approached me, a small, worn photograph in her hand. It was of a young woman, vibrant and smiling, holding a small child. The woman was unmistakably Maria, much younger. The child, my son, she said softly, her eyes distant. He was mute too, not like Leo and Luna, but he chose not to speak after his father left us. He was a good man, but he was always busy, always working. He told me he was building a better life for us, but he forgot to build a life with us. My breath caught. The parallels were chilling. I learned to listen, she continued, her voice barely a whisper, to the sounds he made, to the way he moved his hands, the light in his eyes. He never spoke a word to his father again, not once. Her words were a stark, painful reminder of the irreversible consequences of my own actions. This was the final devastating turn. The justice that was served came with a profound emotional loss. My children might eventually speak, but those first precious words, those initial cries of "Daddy," were lost to me, forever silenced by my past neglect. It was a punishment, not from an external court, but from the depths of my own conscience. The climactic moment arrived on Leo and Luna's 8th birthday. I had organized a small, intimate party, just us, Maria, and a few close family members I had finally reconnected with. As Luna blew out her candles, I saw Maria whisper something to Leo, who then, to my astonishment, reached out and gently took my hand. His small fingers, usually so hesitant, squeezed mine. Then he looked up at me, his eyes wide and full of an emotion I couldn't quite name. And then a sound. It wasn't a word, not yet. It was a soft, almost imperceptible murmur, a sound I had only ever heard him make for Maria. But this time, it was directed at me. My vision blurred again, a fresh wave of tears choking me. It was the collapse, the emotional breakdown, the public confession of my fatherhood, not through words, but through the overwhelming, humbling weight of a simple, tiny sound. The penthouse, once a symbol of my solitary reign, was now a place of quiet, tentative rebuilding. My business still thrived, but I was no longer driven by the frantic need to conquer. My priorities had shifted, profoundly and irrevocably. The twins still communicated largely through their unique language of gestures and sounds, but now I was fluent in it. I saw the world through their eyes, heard it through their silence. My bank account remained intact, a testament to my past life, but my heart was a new landscape, scarred but alive, open to the vulnerability of true connection. What would you have done? Would you have sacrificed everything to find your way back to them? In the end, I had learned that the true measure of wealth wasn't in the billions I commanded, but in the small, precious sounds my children now shared with me. And if, in the end, the truly rich weren't those with the biggest fortunes, but those with the deepest, most authentic connections, then perhaps, after all these years, I was finally beginning to understand what it meant to be truly wealthy.